I woke up with stitches in my side and a brutal truth stuck in my throat. My newborn baby had been held that night, but not by my parents, while I fought for every single breath. My mother was too busy to make a 15-minute drive to the neonatal intensive care unit, and my father simply let it happen. The worst part wasn't that they had chosen themselves over me again. The worst part was that this time, their choice included my child. My name is Sloan Vance. And the first thing that hit me when I opened my eyes was that the silence in the hospital room was heavy enough to crush me. I was 34 years old. I was supposed to be in a cozy birthing suite with dim lighting and an instrumental playlist I had carefully curated over the last 3 weeks. I was supposed to be holding my husband's hand while we counted contractions together. Instead, I was staring at a water stain on the ceiling of what looked like an ICU recovery room, and my body felt like someone had taken it apart and put it back together while losing the instruction manual along the way. A tube protruded from the side of my chest. It was the first specific sensation I could pinpoint. It felt like a thick, cold snake winding between my ribs, and with every shallow breath, it scraped painfully against the bone. My abdomen was on fire. A searing, horizontal line of agony told me exactly how my daughter had entered this world. I tried to sit up, but the machines around me instantly protested with a loud, frantic beeping. A nurse was at my side in less than 2 seconds. She was an older woman with tired eyes and hands that felt impossibly cool against my burning skin. "Lie still, honey," she said, her voice dropping into that specific tone nurses use when a situation is dire but manageable. "You have 3 broken ribs and a chest tube. You're recovering from an emergency C-section. You need to stay perfectly still." I ignored the pain in my ribs. I ignored the throbbing headache pounding behind my eyes like a second heartbeat. I forced my dry tongue to unstick from the roof of my mouth to ask the only question that mattered. "Where is my daughter?" The nurse hesitated for a fraction of a second, and in that microscopic pause, my heart simply stopped. I braced myself for the end of my life. I braced myself to hear that the car wreck had taken her from me. "She is stable," the nurse said quickly, seeing the sheer panic rising in my eyes. "She's in the NICU. She's tiny. Sloan. She was born at 37 weeks. But the trauma of the accident caused her a lot of stress. She's on a ventilator right now just to help her breathe, but she is stable. She's alive. Alive." That one word washed over me, bringing a fresh wave of tears that burned my cheeks. "I want to see her," I rasped out. "Not yet," the nurse said firmly. "You lost a lot of blood. Your vitals are still jumping all over the place. We have to stabilize you first." I turned my head to the side, fighting the painful stiffness in my neck. The room was empty. In the corner sat a chair upholstered in ugly blue vinyl, and it was completely vacant. "Where is Callahan?" I asked. The nurse checked the monitor, adjusting my IV. "Your husband is still in Toronto. He's been calling the nurses' station every 15 minutes. The massive nor'easter over the Midwest grounded all flights. He's trying to rent a car to drive down here to Chicago, but it's going to take him at least 12 hours, maybe more with the blizzard." I closed my eyes. Callahan was stuck. He was hundreds of miles away, probably terrified, probably yelling at an airline employee, or gripping a steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. It wasn't his fault. He had left for a 2-day engineering conference because we both thought we had 3 weeks left until my due date. We thought we had time. But I wasn't alone in this city. My parents lived here. They lived a 15-minute drive from this hospital. They lived in a house where I helped pay the mortgage. They drove a car for which I paid the insurance. I looked at the empty blue chair again. "Did my parents come?" I asked. Silence fell over the room. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor seemed to grow louder, filling the space where an answer should have been. The nurse busied herself with my IV bag, flicking the plastic tubing with her finger. "I asked if my parents are here," I repeated, my voice stronger this time, laced with a dread that was colder than the chest tube between my ribs. The nurse froze. She looked down at me, and her expression softened into something that painfully resembled pity. "Your husband called them," she said gently. "As soon as he got the news from the police, he called them immediately. He told us he spoke to your mother. He begged them to come and sit with the baby until he could get here. And they didn't come." The words hung in the air, simple and devastating. "No." I stared at the ceiling again. I tried to process it logistically. 15 minutes. It was a 15-minute drive down Interstate 90. 10 minutes if you hit the green lights on the avenue. My mother was retired. My father worked part-time at a hardware store. It was a Tuesday night. They were home. They were sitting on that leather sectional I bought them for their anniversary last year. Maybe they're on their way? I whispered, even though I knew perfectly well I was lying to myself. The nurse sighed. She looked like she was debating whether to tell me the rest, but ultimately decided I deserved the truth. We called them again an hour ago, she said quietly. We needed consent for a minor procedure for the baby. And since your husband was on the road losing cell service, we tried reaching your parents as the next of kin. Your mother said she was busy. She stated she couldn't handle the depressing atmosphere of a hospital right now. Busy. I felt a laugh bubble up in my chest, but it quickly morphed into a sob that violently shook my broken ribs. My mother was busy. My daughter was fighting for every breath in a plastic incubator a few halls away, and my mother was busy. A soft knock on the door broke the tension. A young woman peeked into the room. She was wearing a lilac-colored scrub top, different from the nursing staff. She looked exhausted, but radiated warmth. Sloan? She asked. I nodded, unable to speak. My name is Loretta, she said, stepping further into the room. I'm a volunteer. I help out in the NICU as a baby cuddler. The head nurse called me a few hours ago. She walked up to my bed. She didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me with profound solidarity. I just wanted you to know that your little girl was not alone, Loretta said. I was with her for the last 4 hours. I held her hand through the incubator porthole until they stabilized her. I read her stories. She knows someone is there. She's a little warrior, Sloan. She has the grip of a tiny wrestler. I stared at this stranger, a woman I had never met before, who was likely volunteering her time without making a single dime. She had left her home in the middle of a blizzard in the dead of night to hold the hand of a baby she didn't even know. Thank you, I whispered, the tears finally spilling over my cheeks, hot and fast. Thank you for being there when no one else was. Loretta squeezed my hand. Her skin was warm. That's my job, she said softly. But she needs her mama as soon as you're cleared to go down. When Loretta left, the silence instantly returned, but this time it felt different. It felt toxic. I reached for the nightstand. My fingers trembled as I grabbed my phone. The screen was shattered in the corner, a souvenir from the crash, but it still worked. 17 missed calls from Callahan. 32 text messages from him. 3 missed calls from my best friend, Delaney. A text from my boss asking if I was okay. I scrolled down. Nothing from Mom. Nothing from Dad. Absolutely nothing. I opened our family group chat. The last message was sent by me 2 days ago. Doctor says everything looks great. Belly has dropped. We're getting ready. There was no reply to that message either. My thumb hovered over the Instagram icon. I knew I shouldn't do it. I knew it would be like swallowing crushed glass, but I had to see exactly how busy they were. I opened the app. The first circle at the very top of the stories belonged to my younger sister, Monroe. Monroe, who was 30 years old and still finding herself. Monroe, whose rent I had paid 3 times last year because she just needed a little help getting on her feet. I tapped her story. It was posted 2 hours ago, roughly the same time I was being wheeled out of the operating room. Exactly the same time the nurse was calling my mother to ask for consent for my baby. It was a short boomerang video, clinking glasses, bright cocktails with little garnishes. In the background was the ambient lighting of the Cerulean Room, the most expensive new bistro in the upscale downtown district. The caption was written in an ornate, carefree font. Best Tuesday night with the fam. Celebrating life. I swiped to the next slide. It was a photo. My mother, Clarice, was laughing with her head thrown back, holding a martini glass with 3 olives. She was wearing the silk blouse I had bought her for Christmas. My father, Victor, sat in the background sipping a craft beer, looking entirely relaxed. Monroe was in the foreground making a duck face at the camera. They were celebrating life while I was bleeding out on an operating table, and their granddaughter was lying completely alone in a room full of beeping machines. They were barely 15 minutes away. I placed the phone flat against my chest. I could feel the heat radiating from the device. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. And it wasn't the fault of the chest tube. It wasn't the fault of the broken ribs. It was the agonizing realization that hit me harder than the truck running the red light. This wasn't a one-off mistake. This was a learned pattern. My thoughts drifted, completely uninvited, to the bank transfers. To those monthly automated transfers of $2,500 on the first day of every month. The $1,200 for car repairs. The $800 for a medical bill for which I was never shown any documentation. I had sponsored that dinner at the Cerulean Room. I had paid for the drinks they were holding in their hands. I bought the clothes on their backs. For the last 9 years, I was their safety net. I was their retirement fund. I was the good daughter. I had convinced myself that their constant financial crises were just bad luck, that their reliance on me was a form of closeness. But you don't abandon the people you love when they are dying. You don't leave a newborn baby alone in an intensive care unit to go drink overpriced martinis. The phone vibrated against my sternum. It was Callahan again. I swiped to answer and put it on speaker, because I didn't have the strength to hold it to my ear. Sloan. Callahan's voice broke. He sounded like he had been crying for hours. Sloan, my God, are you okay? Have you seen her? Is she all right? I'm alive, Cal, I said, my own voice sounding strange, hollow, and foreign. She's in the NICU. I'm driving, he sobbed. I'm pushing through the snow, but I'm driving. I'll be there. I promise. I am so sorry I'm not with you. It's okay, I said softly. You're trying. Did your parents make it? Callahan asked, his voice suddenly hardening. I called them. Sloan. I begged them. Your mother was acting weird. She said there was a lot of background noise, but I told her it was life or death. I told her to get too outen. I looked at the empty blue chair again. I looked at the dark window reflecting my pale, bruised face. They aren't here, Cal. They didn't come. Callahan went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of his tires on the highway and the crackle of the phone connection. They rejected her, I whispered. Saying it out loud made it an agonizing reality. The words tasted like ash. They rejected our baby, Cal. I heard Callahan draw in a sharp, ragged breath. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated fury that I had never heard from him before. But before he could say anything, before he could start yelling, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It was the calm of a building that had already collapsed. Once the destruction is over, there is no more noise. Only the dust remains. Just get here safely, I told him. Loretta is with her. She's a volunteer. Auden is safe. I love you. I love you so much. I love you, Callahan said. I hung up. I was completely alone in the room. My hands were violently shaking now, but not from medical shock. They were shaking from a sudden, crystalline clarity of mind. I unlocked my phone again. This time I didn't open Instagram. I opened my Bank of America app. Face ID logged me in instantly. The numbers flickered on the screen. Checking account, savings account, and then the automated transfers tab. There it was, scheduled to go out in 3 days, on the 1st of the month. Transfer to mom, dad. Mortgage support. Amount, $2,500. I had stared at that entry for years. I had treated it like a badge of honor. It was proof that I was successful. Proof that I was a wonderful child who took care of her family. But now, looking at it under the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room, while the pain of my sliced abdominal muscles throbbed in rhythm with my pulse, it looked completely different. It looked like a trap I had set for myself. I paid for the gas in the car they didn't bother to drive to see me. I paid for the cell phone data plan they used to post pictures of their party while my daughter lay alone. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. $2,500. It wasn't just money. It was my blood. It was the overtime hours I worked. It was the vacations Callahan and I never took. It was the house we didn't buy so they could keep theirs. And the return on this investment was an absolute zero. I leaned heavily against the pillow, the phone heavy in my hand, as the chest tube painfully ground against my ribs. It was a sharp reminder of reality. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a bank account. And you don't visit a bank account in the hospital. You just wait for the direct deposit to clear. I looked at the cancel transfer button on the screen. My finger hovered right above it. The old Sloan, the Sloan from yesterday, would have been terrified. She would have worried about their mortgage. She would have worried about their feelings. She would have been scared of looking like a bad daughter. But the Sloan from yesterday died on a wet intersection in the blizzard. The woman lying in this bed was someone entirely different. She was Auden's mother. And Auden's mother was officially done paying to be abused. I didn't press the button yet. I just stared at it, letting the hatred warm me, letting it replace the blood I had lost. I would wait. I would wait until I was strong enough to do this exactly right. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I listened to the steady beep of the machines and I plotted, trying to understand how I ended up in a hospital bed staring at my bank account like it was a loaded gun. You have to understand who I was 9 years ago. I was 25. I wasn't this hardened woman covered in surgical scars, coldly calculating betrayal in an ICU. I was full of optimism. I was full of drive. I had just landed my first real job as a junior analyst at Vanguard Financial. I remember holding my employment contract in my hands. I felt the thick, cream-colored paper and thought to myself, this is what security feels like. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to just scrape by. I had a solid salary, fantastic health insurance, and a future that looked like a steady climb upward. I grew up watching my parents juggle bills like flaming chainsaws. They were always just one bad month away from total catastrophe. I promised myself it would be different for me, that I would be the one to finally break our family's cycle of poverty and stress. I didn't know then that the cycle doesn't break just because you start making money. It just gets more expensive. It started 3 weeks after my first paycheck hit my account. I was sitting at my new desk, arranging my pens, feeling incredibly professional and adult. Then my phone rang. It was my mother, Clarice. She was crying. It wasn't a quiet sob. It was a ragged, terrified sound that made me stand up so fast my chair slammed into the cubicle wall. "Mom?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What happened? Is everyone okay?" "It's your dad," she wailed. My stomach dropped into my shoes. My mind raced through car accidents, heart attacks. "He's sick, Sloan. He's felt awful for weeks. And the doctor says he needs advanced scans and to see a specialist. The insurance won't cover it, it's out of network, and we haven't met the deductible. We have to pay out of pocket, and we just don't have the money." I gripped the phone tighter. "How much?" I asked. She hesitated, blowing her nose loudly. "We're already behind on the mortgage. Honey, if we pay for these scans, we lose the roof over our heads. If we pay the mortgage, well, I just don't know what will happen to your father." The silence that followed was thick with implication. She was presenting me with a choice, my father's health or their home. But it wasn't a choice. It was a demand, carefully packaged in a family tragedy. "I have money," I said. The words tumbled out of my mouth before I even processed them. It was pure instinct, the result of training I had undergone since childhood. "Be useful, and you will be loved. I can help you." "Mom, exactly how much do you need?" $2,500, she whispered. "Just to cover the past due mortgage and the first round of doctor visits. Just for this month, until we get back on our feet? $2,500. I quickly ran the math in my head. That was a massive chunk of my new take-home pay. That was my rent, my student loan payment, and my grocery budget combined. But I still had a signing bonus sitting in my savings account. I could do this. I could be the hero. "Okay," I said, feeling a strange mixture of nausea and pride. "I'll wire you the money today. Thank you, Sloan." "Oh, thank you. You're saving our lives." And then came the hook. The moment that should have made me run for the hills, but instead pulled me deeper into their web. "Sloan, listen to me," she said, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. "Just don't tell your father. He would be so ashamed." She pushed forward. "You know how proud he is. If he knew his little girl had to bail him out, it would break his heart. Let me handle the money. Let him think I just managed to shuffle our budget around. It will be our little secret." It felt so intimate. I felt like my mother and I were accomplices protecting the fragile ego of the man we both loved. I agreed. That same afternoon, I sent the transfer. $2,500 vanished. I waited for the relief. I waited for my mother to call back the next day, sounding calmer, telling me the scans were booked and the house was safe. She didn't call. When I called her a week later, she sounded breezy, carefree. When I asked about Dad's tests, she was evasive. "Oh, the doctor thinks it might just be stress," she said. "We're keeping an eye on it." "And the mortgage?" I asked. "Paid," she replied. "Yes, thanks to you. That's what good daughters do, Sloan. They take care of their family." And that was it. No tearful gratitude, no promises to pay me back. Just an affirmation of my new role. I was the good daughter. The transaction was complete. I tried to put it out of my mind. I told myself it was a one-time emergency. That's life. But a month later, I drove home for the holidays. I pulled into the driveway of the house I had just saved from foreclosure. I expected to see a grim place, a household struggling to recover from a financial abyss. Instead, I saw a brand new set of patio furniture sitting on the back deck. It was elaborate wicker with plush cream cushions. It looked incredibly expensive. It looked brand new. I stood on the lawn staring at it, my stomach tying itself in knots. "Mom," I said, when she came out the back door to hug me. "Where did this come from?" She followed my gaze and waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, that old thing? Found it on clearance. Practically gave it away. It really brightens up the space, don't you think?" I wanted to ask to see the receipt. I wanted to ask where they got the cash to buy clearance furniture when 4 weeks ago they needed my savings to keep a roof over their heads. But I didn't. I didn't want to ruin the holidays. I didn't want to be the bad daughter penny-pinching her parents while her father was supposedly recovering. Then I saw my sister, Monroe. Monroe was 21 at the time. She still lived at home. She worked a few shifts a week at a boutique and spent the rest of her time carefully curating her social media aesthetic. She bounced down the stairs looking radiant and healthy. "Look," she squealed, shoving a designer handbag under my nose. It wasn't a knockoff. I knew the brand it retailed for at least $600. Mom got it for me as a reward for passing midterms. Monroe beamed. I looked at Clarice. Her back was to me, busy stirring gravy on the stove. "I thought money was tight," I said, my voice strained. My mother turned around, her expression hardening for a fraction of a second. "We have to celebrate our small victories, Sloan. You can't live in perpetual misery just because things get tough. Besides, Monroe needs to look professional for job interviews." I swallowed the massive lump in my throat. I looked at the patio furniture. I looked at the purse. I looked at my father, who was watching football in the living room, looking the picture of health and eating an entire bowl of expensive macadamia nuts. Maybe I'm the selfish one. The thought crept into my head like poison. Maybe I just don't understand how household finances work. Maybe they really did scrape by to put me through college, and now it's my turn to give back. I'm making good money now. Why shouldn't they have nice things? So, I let it go. But the phone calls didn't stop. 3 months later, the water heater blew. The basement flooded. "Sloan," Clarice cried over the phone. "The mold will kill your father with his immune system. You know how he is." Amount: $1,800. 2 months after that, there was a lapse in their auto insurance after a minor fender bender. "They're going to suspend your father's license, Sloan. He can't work without a car." Amount: $1,200. Then there was some urgent, vague debt she couldn't clearly explain over the phone, but it was apparently threatening enough to keep her up at night. It became a new rhythm, a dark, painful, and very expensive heartbeat setting the pace of my life. Every time I saw a Vanguard deposit hit my account, I braced myself for the emergency cash extraction. My savings plateaued. My student loan barely budged. I was making over $140,000 a year, but I was living like I was making minimum wage. Then I met Callahan. Callahan was an engineer. He was painfully logical, incredibly kind, and viewed the world in terms of load-bearing structures and breaking points. We had been dating for 6 months when things got serious enough to talk about the future. We were sitting in his apartment, drinking cheap wine. He had a spreadsheet open on his laptop. Callahan loved spreadsheets. "I'm looking into buying a townhouse," he said, turning the screen toward me. "Nothing crazy, just a small place in the suburbs. But if we're serious, I want to know where we both stand." I want to build something with you, Sloan. He showed me his savings, his 401k contributions. It was genuinely impressive. He was incredibly disciplined. Then he looked at me. I notice you never talk about buying property, he said gently. You drive that old sedan that stalls out every winter. You have an amazing job, Sloan. Where is it all going? I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. I couldn't tell him. I had promised my mother. Don't tell your father. He would be so ashamed. The secret had metastasized. It wasn't just hiding it from my father anymore. It was hiding it from everyone. If I told Callahan, he would run the math. He would ask questions I couldn't answer. I still have student loans, I lied. A lot of them. And the cost of living in the city is high. Callahan studied me. He had a specific way of looking at things, as if he were inspecting a bridge span for microfractures. He saw the fracture in me, but decided not to press it yet. Okay, he said slowly, but we need to start planning. You have to pay yourself first, Sloan. You can't build a future living on scraps. I nodded, feeling profoundly sick, because I knew my future didn't belong to me. My future was already mortgaged to fund my parents' present. A week later, Clarice called again. This time she wasn't crying. She sounded entirely exhausted, resigned. It's too much, Sloan, she said. This constant asking you for money every few months. It's so humiliating for me. I felt a sudden surge of hope. Was she going to end it? Were they finally going to sell that massive house and downsize like I had suggested dozens of times? She continued. I was thinking, just to make it easier on all of us, maybe we could set it up as a standing thing. You know, just to cover the baseline overhead so I don't have to call you in a panic and ruin your workday. A standing thing, a subscription to having parents. How much? I asked, my voice hollow. Just the $2,500, she said lightly. That covers the mortgage and the utilities. It keeps us safe, Sloan. It keeps your father from stressing out. You know stress is a silent killer. I looked at the stack of paperwork on my desk. I looked at a framed photo of Callahan I had just put up. I was so bone-tired. I was sick of the emergency calls, the adrenaline spikes, the constant guilt trips. If I automate it, I rationalized to myself, I can stop thinking about it. It will just be another boring bill like rent or taxes. I could buy my peace of mind for $2,500 a month. Okay, I said, a lump in my throat. I logged into my banking app. I went to the Transfers tab. I typed in their routing number. I knew it by heart. I typed in $2,500. I selected the frequency, monthly, and then I checked the one box that sealed my fate. Until canceled. I stared at the screen. Mom, I started. I'm setting it up now. But this is just temporary, right? Just until Dad figures out his Social Security? Just until Monroe moves out? Of course, honey, she said. Her voice was light again. Happy. Of course, just a little while. You're such a good daughter, Sloan. I don't know what we'd do without you. I clicked Submit. The screen flashed green. Success! Recurring transfer scheduled. I didn't know it then, but I had just signed a contract that would last for 9 long years. I had just agreed to sponsor her girls' nights out, her spa weekends, her new deck furniture, and the entire illusion of her upper-middle-class success. I put my phone down and stared at the black screen. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, but it was immediately replaced by a cold, empty feeling in my gut. I never touched those settings again. I let it run. I let it bleed me dry. Month after month, year after year. I told myself I was helping. I told myself I was doing it out of love. I didn't realize I wasn't paying for their survival. I was paying for them to forget I existed until the moment I needed them the most. That $2,500 became the floor, not the ceiling. That was the first rule of the new economy I was living in. For the first year, the automated transfer sat there like a silent roommate, eating its share of my income without complaint. But silence in my family never meant peace. It was just the deep breath taken before the next demand. It started with inflation. That was the word Clarice used. She complained that grocery prices were skyrocketing. She said the gas bills were highway robbery. She claimed the county had drastically raised their property taxes and was bleeding them dry. I was 28. It was the 3rd year of the arrangement. I got promoted at Vanguard. I moved from a cubicle to an office, with a window overlooking the parking lot. My salary jumped significantly, but my lifestyle was frozen in a state of extended adolescence. I still drove the same rattling sedan. I still shopped the clearance racks. When Clarice called to tell me the $2,500 wasn't stretching like it used to, I felt the familiar cocktail of guilt and obligation. "We just can't make it work, Sloan," she said. "I'm clipping coupons, turning the thermostat down to 60 degrees. Your father is sitting in the living room wearing a heavy coat." The image of my father shivering in his own home was enough to bypass all my logic. "How much?" I asked. "3,000, she said. "It's just $500 more. What is that to you? A few nice dinners out, but for us, it means heat." I didn't tell her I didn't go out to nice dinners. I didn't tell her that $500 was exactly what I was trying to save for a new transmission. I just said, "Okay," logged in, and bumped the number up. The temporary nature of this help evaporated without a trace. We never spoke of an end date again. It was now an entitlement. It was a fixed line item in their budget, counted upon as surely as the sun rising. Callahan noticed the strain before he noticed the numbers. We were living together by then, in a modest apartment that was fine but small. We were talking about marriage, talking about the things couples talk about when they decide to grow old together. One evening in late October, he came home with a travel brochure for Italy. "It's the off-season," he said, his eyes bright. "Flights are cheap. We could do 10 days. Rome? Florence. Maybe take a train down to the Amalfi Coast. You have PTO built up, Sloan. You haven't taken a real vacation in 3 years." I looked at the brochure. The water in the photos was an impossible shade of blue. I wanted to go so badly. I wanted to drink wine in a piazza and forget my phone existed. And then I did the mental math. The trip would be around $3,000 each. That was my parent subscription plus a little extra. If I went, I would have to dip into my emergency fund, which was already dangerously low because I had covered a surprise dental bill for Monroe 2 months prior. "I can't," I said, turning back to the stove so he wouldn't see my face. Callahan set the brochure down. The joy evaporated from the room instantly. "Why?" he asked. "And don't tell me it's work. I know your project cycle. You're clear in November." "It's just not a good time financially," I lied. Callahan leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing his arms. "Sloan, between us, we pull in a serious household income. We're in a high tax bracket. We live in a cheap apartment. We drive old cars. We don't have kids yet. If we can't afford a budget trip to Italy now, when will we ever afford it?" I started stirring the pasta sauce, my hand making frantic circles. "I just have a lot of overhead, Cal." "The student loans." He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked the question I dreaded most. "Can I see them? Your loan statements? Let's consolidate them. I can help you look at the interest rates. It makes no sense that they're draining you this badly." My heart hammered. I turned around and tried to laugh, but it sounded sharp and brittle. "I have it under control, Cal. I don't need a financial advisor. I need a boyfriend who trusts I can manage my own debts." Callahan stepped back like I had slapped him. The hurt on his face was immediate and profound. "I'm not trying to control you," he said quietly. "I'm trying to understand why we live like we're broke when we aren't." I didn't answer. I couldn't answer because the truth was too humiliating. The truth was, I wasn't broke. I was being actively robbed and I was holding the door open with a smile. We didn't go to Italy. We stayed home. And on the 1st of the month, I sent the damn transfer, receiving a heart emoji text from Clarice in return. That was the exchange rate. Italy for a heart emoji. The isolation at family events grew deeper. We spent Christmas that year at my parents' house, the house I was paying for. I arrived early to help cook, as usual. I brought a standing rib roast, wine, and pies. I dropped over $400 at the high-end grocery store that morning. Clarice was in the kitchen, but she wasn't cooking. She was painstakingly arranging an elaborate charcuterie board. "Oh, just throw that in the oven, honey," she said, waving vaguely at the roast. Not even looking at me. "Monroe will be down in a minute." She was up late working on her portfolio. Monroe was 24 now. She had graduated from a college I heavily subsidized and was now building a career as a lifestyle coach which, as far as I could tell, meant organizing people's closets for free and posting pictures of expensive lattes. When Monroe finally came downstairs, it was a grand entrance. She wore a cashmere sweater and held the newest iPhone. Clarice practically clapped her hands together. "Just look at her," Clarice beamed. "Look at that glow. That is the face of a girl who's going places." Monroe gave me a loose hug. "Hey, Sloan, you look tired. Working a lot, huh? You okay?" "I'm fine," I said, wrestling with a massive roasting pan to shove 10 pounds of meat into the oven. The Christmas dinner was like a stage play where Monroe was the muse and I was the stagehand. Clarice spent the entire meal detailing Monroe's minor achievements. Monroe gained 1,000 followers. Monroe had a prospective client in New York. Monroe was thinking about starting a podcast. "We are just so proud of her artistic soul," Clarice said, topping off her wine glass the wine I had bought. "She's so brave, taking risks. Not everyone has that kind of courage." She looked pointedly at me when she said it. The subtext was neon bright. I was just a corporate drone. I was a safe, boring analyst who sat in a gray office pushing papers. I wasn't brave. I just had a banking app and an open wallet. Then my Aunt Maria, my father's sister, turned to me. She was a good woman, but she only knew what she was told. "We miss you at the summer barbecues, Sloan," Aunt Maria said. "Your mother says you're always just too busy with work. It's a shame. You shouldn't let your career take over your life. Family comes first." I froze with my fork halfway to my mouth. Too busy. I looked at Clarice. She was thoughtfully cutting a piece of roast beef, refusing to meet my eye. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and slam my fists on the table. I wanted to yell, "I don't go to the barbecues because I'm working overtime to pay for the steaks you're eating. I'm not cold. I'm exhausted." But then I looked at my father. Vance was eating in silence, his eyes fixed on his plate. He looked older than he was. He looked fragile. If I caused a scene, it would upset him. It would stress him out. I forced a smile that must have looked like a grimace. "You know how it is, Aunt Maria," I said. "Deadlines can be brutal." Clarice looked up then and gave me a tight, small smile. It was a smile of absolute approval. I had played my part. I had protected her narrative. "I'm just glad we have at least one daughter who can handle the corporate grind," Clarice said, patting my hand. "Sloan is our rock. She doesn't need the spotlight." "Right, honey?" I felt like a prop. I felt like a wallet she carried in her purse. Necessary, functional, but kept tucked out of sight until it was time to pay. 2 days later, my phone rang while I was at the office. I checked the caller ID, expecting Callahan or a client. It was Harlan Vance, my grandfather. I stared at the screen. I hadn't spoken to Grandfather Harlan in over a year. Clarice always acted as the buffer between us. She told me he was getting difficult in his old age. She told me he was grumpy and didn't like to be disturbed. She told me he was losing touch with reality. I answered. "Hello?" "Sloan." His voice was deep and gravelly, sounding like old timber soaked in tobacco. "Hi, Grandpa," I said, surprised. "Is everything okay?" "I'm sitting here looking at a calendar," he said, wasting no time on pleasantries. "And I realized I haven't seen my oldest granddaughter in 6 months. Your mother says you're working yourself into an early grave." I felt the familiar, trained, defensive script rise in my throat. "I'm just busy, Grandpa. It's a busy time of year." There was a silence on the line. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a listening silence. Grandfather Harlan ran a construction company for 40 years. He knew the difference between a load-bearing wall and cheap drywall. He cleared his throat. "Sloan, I want to ask you a question, and I want you to tell me the truth. Do not brush me off with polite nonsense. Understood?" "Okay," I said, my stomach tightening. "Is someone taking care of you?" The question hung in the air. Bizarre and piercing. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean, are you all right? Are you building a life for yourself? Or are you just keeping things afloat so they don't sink?" My heart began to race. Did he know? How could he know? Clarice kept the finances under lock and key. She would never tell him she was taking money from me. My grandfather was old school. He believed a man provided for his household. If he knew Vance was living off his own daughter's paycheck, he would explode. But if I told him, I would blow everything up. I would humiliate my father. I would destroy the fragile peace I bought at such a high price. "I'm fine, Grandpa," I lied. The words tasted like sour milk. "Everyone is fine. Callahan and I are doing great. Work is good." He didn't speak right away. I could hear his steady breathing. I could picture him sitting in his leather armchair, staring out the window at his bird feeders, gripping the receiver with those scarred, strong hands. He didn't believe me. I could feel it through the phone line. "You sound bone-tired." "Sloan," he said finally. It's been a long week." "Listen to me," he said, his voice dropping an octave. It became softer, yet more unyielding. "If that ever changes. If you ever feel like things are not fine, if you feel like the water is getting too high, you call me." I squeezed the phone. "You call me, Sloan." "I mean it," he added. "Even if it's uncomfortable, even if you think I'll be angry. You call me. I am not as oblivious as some people in this family like to think." He hung up. I sat in my office listening to the dial tone. He knew something. Or he suspected something. He threw me a rope. All I had to do was grab it. All I had to do was say, "No, Grandpa, I'm drowning. They are eating me alive." But I was too well trained. I was too conditioned. I was the rock. I was the good daughter. I put the phone down, wiped a single tear from my cheek before a coworker walked past my glass door, and promised myself I would call him eventually. I told myself that once I got my parents stabilized, once Clarice stopped asking, once the crisis passed, I would visit him and we'd talk. I didn't know that eventually would never come. I didn't know the crisis was a designed system. I opened my email. A notification from the bank sat at the top. Transfer completed. $3,000. I deleted the email. I went back to work. Day by day, hour by hour, I dug my own grave, shovel by shovel, naively telling myself I was building them a foundation. I found out I was pregnant on a Tuesday morning in April. I was 33. The line on the test turned pink before I could even set it down on the bathroom vanity. It was immediate. No ambiguity, no squinting under the light to find a faint ghost of a line. It was thick, bold, and undeniable. I sat on the edge of the bathtub and stared at my knees. I expected to feel joy. I expected the cinematic rush of excitement Monroe was always posting about whenever she got a new puppy or a new boyfriend. But what I felt was a sudden, terrifying clarity. It was as if my body, now hosting a second heartbeat, had suddenly developed a ruthless intolerance for bullshit. For nearly a decade, I had rationalized the financial drain. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was my duty. I told myself Callahan and I could absorb it because it was just the two of us. We could buy cheaper groceries, drive older cars, wait to buy a house. But as my hand moved down to rest on my still flat stomach, the realization hit me. I couldn't wait anymore. It wasn't just about keeping myself afloat now. I was responsible for a new life. A life that had no say in this arrangement. Every dollar I sent to my parents was a dollar I was stealing from this child. Callahan found me there 20 minutes later. He saw the test on the counter, saw the look on my face, dropped to his knees, and wrapped his arms around my waist, burying his face against my stomach. He cried tears of pure joy. He talked about painting a nursery. He talked about names, and all I could think about was the first of the month. 2 weeks later, the morning sickness hit. And with it came the brutal collision with reality. Callahan walked into the living room on a Saturday morning. He didn't have a coffee mug in his hand. He had his laptop. His face was grim. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. "Sloan, we have to talk," he said. And it wasn't about the baby. It was about math. He set the laptop on the coffee table. He had built a spreadsheet. It wasn't just a list of transactions. It was a forensic audit of my life since I was 25. He had dug through our joint accounts, my old bank statements, and every emergency excuse I had ever mentioned to him. He color-coded it. Red for the monthly recurring transfers, orange for the emergency asks. And in a column next to it, he had pasted screenshots of Clarice and Monroe's social media accounts, cross-referenced by date. "Look at this," Callahan said, his voice measured but hard. He pointed to a date 3 years ago. Transfer, $1,800. Reason, Dad's meds not covered. Social media post same week. Monroe checks into VIP tent at Coachella, wearing designer wristbands. He scrolled down. Transfer, $1,200. Reason, furnace repair. Social media post 3 days later. Clarice posts photo of new KitchenAid stand mixer and copper cookware set. Caption, time for a little treat. He scrolled to the very bottom. The final cell contained a bolded number. It was staggering. I stared at the number, all the breath leaving my lungs. $315,000, Callahan said quietly. That's a house, Sloan. That's our kids' college fully funded. That's our retirement. This isn't help. It's theft. I tried to look away, but he wouldn't let me. They are lying to you, he said. They have been lying to you for almost a decade. They aren't poor. They are parasites. And now we have a baby coming. We cannot afford to support 4 adults on 2 salaries. I felt the defensive reflex kick in. That old, installed script Clarice had wired into my brain. But it was weaker this time. It crumbled under the weight of that one number. $315,000. I have to call her, I whispered. You have to cut them off, Callahan corrected. I can't just sever it, I said, panic rising in my throat. If I stop paying their mortgage, they lose the house. Dad loses his house. I can't do that to him. Callahan looked at me with a mix of frustration and sorrow. Then reduce it, he said. Tell them a baby is coming. Tell them the dynamic is changing. See how they react. It will tell you everything you need to know. I reached for my phone. My hands were sweating. I waited until Callahan went into the kitchen to make tea. I had to do this myself. I had to manage the fallout. I dialed their landline. Clarice picked up on the 3rd ring. Hello? She sounded breathless. I could hear the TV running in the background. Hi, Mom, I said. Oh, Sloan, did you remember the transfer hits on Tuesday? I was just going to remind you that the car needs new tires, so if you could throw in an extra $500, it would just save us. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask why I was calling on a Saturday morning. She opened the conversation by handing me an invoice. Mom, I have news, I said, forcing my voice to stay level. I'm pregnant. There was a pause. A long, stretching silence. Well, she said finally, her tone entirely flat. That is big news. I waited for the congratulations. I waited for the squeal of delight. Are you keeping it? She asked. The question felt like a physical slap across the face. Of course I'm keeping it, Mom. Callahan and I are thrilled. Right, she said. Well, babies are expensive. That's what I want to talk to you about, I said, gripping the fabric of the couch cushions. Because of the baby. And because I'll be going on maternity leave eventually, and we need to set up a nursery, we have to revise our budget. Revise your budget? Her voice dropped 10 degrees. I can't send the full $3,000 anymore, I said, the words tumbling out. I can send $1,500 to help with the mortgage itself, but I have to start saving for my own family now. The silence on the other end of the line wasn't empty. It was freezing. It was the weaponized silence I knew from childhood. It was the silence that meant I was being bad. I waited. My heart beat so fast I was afraid it would hurt the baby. After everything we sacrificed for you, she said. Her voice was low, vibrating with manufactured rage. Excuse me? I asked. We raised you, Sloan. We gave up everything. We put food in your mouth. We bought your clothes. We paid for your piano lessons. We sacrificed our comfort so you could go have your fancy career. And now that you've made it, you're going to nickel and dime your own parents? I wasn't nickel and diming her. I had given her nearly $333,000. Mom, I'm not cutting you off. I'm just saying my priorities have to shift. You are so selfish, she snarled. You only think about yourself. Do you think I wanted to spend my life worrying about bills? I did it all for you, and this is how you repay us. You abandon us the second you get knocked up. The cruelty of her phrasing hit me so hard my eyes filled with burning tears. Mom, please, just understand. Maybe we should let her. It was my father's voice. Weak, in the background. He must have been listening. "Shut up, Vance," Clarice hissed, pulling the phone away from her mouth. There was a scuffle on the line, the sound of her heavy breathing. My father tried. He tried to say, "Maybe we should let her keep her own money." He tried to be a father, and she slammed him shut like a book. And he let her. That was the moment my fear fundamentally changed. For years, my terror was about losing their love. I was afraid if I stopped paying, they would stop loving me. But sitting there, pregnant, crying, listening to my mother berate me for wanting to buy diapers instead of funding her patio furniture, I realized something far worse. I wasn't going to lose their love, because I never had it. Love doesn't demand ransom. Love doesn't look at a grandchild as a financial competitor. Love doesn't silence a husband trying to do the right thing. They didn't love me. They loved my transactions. I was a prime asset to them. And assets are not allowed to depreciate. Callahan walked back into the room. He saw my face. He saw me curled into myself, clutching my stomach. He took the phone out of my hand. He didn't say a word to her. He just hung up, sat down next to me, and pulled me tight against his chest. I cried until his shirt was soaked. I cried for the parents I desperately wanted, and I cried for the parents I actually had. Later that night, we were lying in bed in the dark. Callahan reached out and gently rested his hand on my stomach. "Sloan," he said quietly, "if you keep paying her," he let the sentence hang in the dark room. "If you show Auden that love means letting people hurt you, what will she learn about love?" The question stuck in my chest like a shard of glass. What would she learn? She would learn that boundaries are rude. She would learn that you have to buy your seat at the family table. She would learn that being a good daughter means setting yourself on fire to keep others warm. I didn't want her to learn that. I wanted her to know she was valuable simply because she existed. But habits are deep, and fear is heavy. I didn't cancel the transfer. The next day, Clarice sent me a text. It wasn't an apology. It was a photo of my father looking sad at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. "He is so worried about the future," the caption read. "I don't know if his heart can take this stress." It was a lie. I knew it was a lie. But the hook was still in my mouth. I replied, "I'll figure it out. Don't worry." I logged into the bank. I left the transfer at $3,000. But then I did something I had never done before. I created a new folder on my laptop. I password protected it. I named it Evidence. I went through my banking app and downloaded every statement for the last 9 years. I went onto Clarice's Facebook page and started screenshotting. Every vacation, every outfit, every check-in at an expensive restaurant. I went onto Monroe's Instagram and archived her stories. The VIP tents, the designer bags, the brunches. I was still paying the ransom, but I wasn't blindfolded anymore. I was mapping the architecture of my own kidnapping. I touched my stomach. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the tiny cluster of cells inside me. "I'm not strong enough to stop them yet, but I promise you, I will get there. I'm building us a shield." I didn't reduce the amount. I let them think they won. I let Clarice believe her emotional blackmail had worked, that I had fallen back into line, and her personal ATM was repaired. But as I saved file after file, dragging document after document into that folder, a cold, hard determination formed in my gut. It was the only inheritance I could give my daughter. I was going to keep paying, but I was making damn sure that when the end finally came, I would hold all the cards. The rain that night wasn't just rain. It was a sheet of gray steel, slamming furiously against the windshield of my car. I was 37 weeks pregnant. My ankles were swollen to the point where my shoes felt like vises, and my lower back was a tight knot of dull, pulsing agony. I had stayed late at the office to finish a compliance audit, wanting everything perfectly tied up before maternity leave. I wanted to be good. I wanted to be reliable. I turned onto the intersection of Oak Brush and Mercer. The light was green. I remember that vividly. A solid, reassuring green circle cutting through the downpour. I was thinking about our water heater. It was making a strange noise, and I was mentally calculating if I could afford a plumber this month after the damn transfer hit my parents' account. I was thinking about a hot shower. I was thinking about Callahan, who was in Toronto, and how much I missed the smell of his shirts. I didn't see the truck, I felt it. The impact wasn't a sound. It was a physical reconfiguration of my entire world. The side of my car ceased to exist. Metal screamed a high, tearing pitch that sounded like a wounded animal. The world spun violently. Glass shattered, raining over me in sharp, diamond-like shards. The airbag deployed with the force of a prize fighter, knocking all the oxygen from my lungs, followed immediately by the harsh, biting smell of chemical powder. And then, silence. The rain drummed on the roof, but it sounded miles away. I tried to move my hand to touch my stomach, but my arm refused to obey. I looked down. There was blood. A lot of blood. And I felt a terrifying, unnatural pressure in my lower abdomen. "My baby," I tried to say. But no sound came out. Then came the lights, red and blue, strobing against the wet asphalt, refracting through the raindrops. Short, clipped voices. Urgent, professional commands. Female driver pinned. 37 weeks pregnant. Clear signs of fetal distress. Get the jaws. Stay with me, ma'am. Stay with me. The world dissolved into a mosaic of pain and noise. The sound of cutting metal. The sensation of being lifted. The rattle of a hospital gurney. And through it all, only one screaming thought. Save her. Please, just save her. Hundreds of miles away, Callahan was in a Toronto hotel room ironing a shirt for the next day's conference. His phone rang. It was an unknown number with a Chicago area code. He answered, expecting a telemarketer. "Mr. Callahan Vance? This is Officer Davis with the Chicago Police Department." Callahan dropped the iron. "There's been an accident. Your wife is at Mercy General. She's in critical condition. They're rushing her to surgery right now. They have to deliver the baby." Callahan's world stopped spinning. He sat heavily on the hotel bed. His legs simply stopped working. "Is she alive?" "She is, sir. But you need to get here." Callahan snapped into frantic motion. He threw his clothes into a bag. He checked flights canceled for weather, delayed. Nothing out until 6:00 a.m. He was trapped. He ran down to the rental car desk in the lobby. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped his credit card twice. He got a car. He drove directly into the teeth of the blizzard, gripping the steering wheel and screaming into the empty vehicle. But he knew he wouldn't make it in time. He knew his daughter was going to be born terrified and traumatized in a room full of strangers. He knew his wife was being cut open in total isolation. He needed someone on the ground. He needed family. He dialed Clarice. The phone rang 4 times. Callahan prayed silently. "Please answer. Please. For once, just be a mother." "Hello." Clarice's voice was loud and joyous. In the background, Callahan could hear music, a saxophone, laughter, and the clinking of silverware. "Clarice." Callahan yelled over the road noise and the background chatter. "Clarice, listen to me." "Callahan!" She sounded surprised, maybe a little tipsy. "Why are you yelling? We're at the Cerulean Room. The jazz trio tonight is just phenomenal. You should hear this sax player." Callahan felt bile rise in his throat. "Clarice." Sloane was in a car accident. She was hit by a truck. She's at Mercy General. They're doing surgery right now. They're taking the baby. It's an emergency C-section. The line went silent, but the background music didn't. It kept playing its upbeat jazz melody. "Oh my God," Clarice said, but she didn't sound horrified. She sounded inconvenienced. "Is she okay?" "I don't know," Callahan screamed. "They said critical condition." "I'm in Toronto. I can't get there for another 10 hours. "Clarice, you are 15 minutes from the hospital. You need to go. You have to go right now." There was a pause. Callahan heard Clarice muffle the phone, but he could still hear the muffled conversation. "It's Callahan. Sloane crashed her car. She's in the hospital." Then he heard Victor's voice, faint but clear. "It's bad. We should go." Clarice's reply, sharper now. "We just ordered the charcuterie, Victor. They're bringing the drinks right now." She came back on the line. "Callahan, honey, listen. We are in the middle of dinner with the Lewises. We haven't seen them in months. It would be so rude if we just up and left. Callahan pulled the car over to the shoulder of the highway because he could no longer see the road through tears of pure rage. Rude? Are you kidding me? Your daughter might be dying. Your granddaughter is being born right now. Clarice gave a long, exasperated sigh. Sloane is always so dramatic, Callahan. She overreacts to everything. Remember when she thought she had appendicitis and it was just gas? I'm sure she's fine. Monroe never puts us through this kind of stress. Monroe is so easy. Callahan stared blankly at the dashboard. Monroe never puts people through this. Sloane got T-boned by a truck, and her mother was comparing her to her sister as if being violently swept off the road was a character flaw. I am begging you, Callahan whispered. Just go. Look, we'll finish dinner, Clarice said, her tone adopting that specific cadence of a mother scolding a whining toddler. We'll swing by in a few hours once we know if there's actually a real problem and she's not just panicking. Okay? Let us know what happens. She hung up. Callahan sat in the quiet, parked car. The rain drummed on the roof. He looked at the phone. He had heard Victor. Victor was there. Victor knew. And Victor said nothing. He let her hang up. He chose appetizers over his dying daughter. Callahan realized then that Sloane was practically an orphan. She had parents on paper, but in reality, she was devastatingly alone. And then he remembered a story Sloane had told him once, about a phone call. About an old man who asked her if someone was taking care of her. Callahan frantically searched his contacts. He didn't have the number. He went to Google. Vance Construction. He found the landline. It was 10 at night. The old man was surely asleep. Callahan called anyway. It rang. Once. Twice. Vance residence. A gruff but remarkably alert voice answered. Sir, Callahan started, his voice cracking. This is Callahan, Sloane's husband. There was a beat of silence, then an immediate shift in tone. Sharp. Urgent. What's wrong, son? Callahan broke down. He couldn't help it. The rejection from Clarice had broken something inside him, and the firmness in this stranger's voice was the only thing holding him together. Sloane was in an accident. She's at Mercy General. Emergency surgery. The baby is coming. I'm stuck in Toronto. I can't get there. Where are her parents? Harlan asked. The question sounded like the crack of a whip. I called them. Callahan choked out. They're at dinner. They said they were busy. They said they'd come by later. The silence on the other end of the line was terrifying. It was the silence of a man deciding which building to demolish. Callahan took a deep breath. Sir, I think they're going to let your great-granddaughter lie in the NICU completely alone. I think Sloane is going to wake up alone. Harlan didn't hesitate for a fraction of a second. What room? I don't know yet. I just know it's the NICU at Mercy. I am 20 minutes away, Harlan said. I will be there in 15. Drive safe, son. Do not kill yourself trying to get here. I am securing the perimeter. But for the first time in an hour, he didn't feel powerless. Someone was coming. Someone who didn't give a damn about restaurant appetizers. Someone who understood that family wasn't just a word thrown around at parties. Family was showing up when the sky fell down and there was blood on the floor. Callahan drove through the dark, whispering thanks to a man he had only met twice, praying to God the old man's pickup truck made it before the absolute loneliness broke his wife's heart. The first thing that came back to me was the pain. It wasn't a dull ache. It was a sharp, screaming line of fire across my lower abdomen, making me feel like I was being ripped apart at the seams while fully conscious. I opened my eyes, and the fluorescent lights of the hospital room assaulted me. They were too bright, too sterile, buzzing with a low frequency that vibrated in my skull. I blinked, trying to cut through the fog of anesthesia, trying to remember why I was staring at a ceiling tile with a shoe-shaped water stain. Then the memory hit me with full force. The rain, the truck, the steering wheel crushing my ribs. My hands instantly flew down to my stomach. It was gone. The hard, round curve I had lived with for months, the safe harbor where my daughter had been kicking just hours ago. It simply vanished. My stomach was soft, bandaged, and terrifyingly empty. Panic seized my throat. I tried to sit up, but my body protested with a silent scream of agony, and the machine beside me began to beep frantically. Easy, a voice said gently. Easy, Sloan. You're okay. I turned my head. A nurse was adjusting the IV in my arm. She looked tired, and her eyes were full of compassion in a way that truly terrified me. Where is she? I rasped. My voice sounded like gravel. Where is my baby? She's alive, the nurse said quickly, placing a hand on my shoulder. She's in the NICU. She's stable. She's tiny, but she's strong. She's alive. That word was a lifeline. I grabbed it and held on tight. I want to see her. Soon, the nurse promised. First, we have to get your pain under control. You lost a lot of blood. I looked around the room. It was small and gray. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. It was 3:00 a.m. Is my husband here? I asked. He's on his way, she replied. The weather is awful. He calls every hour. He's driving down from Toronto. I nodded, closing my eyes. Callahan was coming. Callahan would be here. But then a darker question floated to the surface. A question I was afraid to ask because, deep down, I already knew the answer. My parents, I whispered. Did my parents come? Dead silence fell over the room. The nurse stopped adjusting the IV. She looked at the monitor. She looked at the door. She looked everywhere but at me. No, honey, she said softly. No one is here. I felt a cold spread through my chest that had absolutely nothing to do with the air conditioning. They lived 15 minutes away. I was in surgery for hours. Maybe they're with the baby, I said, grasping at shreds of hope. Maybe they're in the NICU. The nurse hesitated, biting her lip slightly. I can double check, she said. But when we called them last, well, no one answered. That was when the door opened and Loretta, the volunteer cuddler, walked in to tell me my daughter wasn't alone. It was when I realized the hospital had initiated emergency protocols for abandoned infants. My daughter had been classified by the hospital as abandoned. I reached for the nightstand. I grabbed my shattered phone. I saw the text messages from Callahan. I saw Monroe's Instagram story at the cerulean room. I watched my mother laugh holding a martini while I bled out on the table. They didn't get stuck in traffic. Their phones didn't die. They didn't suddenly fall ill. They were just having a great time, and they knew exactly what was happening, Callahan called them. The nurse called them. They knew perfectly well I was dying, and they decided their upscale appetizers were more important. Something broke inside me in that moment. It wasn't a loud snap. It was a quiet, final sound, like a dead branch breaking on a tree in the dead of winter. For 9 years, I had been so afraid. Afraid of upsetting them. Afraid of looking selfish. Afraid of losing the only family I had. But looking at that video, I realized I didn't have a family. I had a payroll. I closed Instagram and opened my Bank of America app. Face ID scanned my bruised, swollen face and logged me in. I went to the Scheduled Transfers tab. There it was. The recurring payment, $3,000. I stared at the number. This was the price of my servitude. This was the cost of the grand lie. My thumb hovered over the transaction. My heart hammered against my ribs, triggering another painful spasm in my chest. But I ignored it. I felt a sudden rush of that old, familiar fear. Clarice's voice screaming in my head. How could you? You're going to make us lose the house. Let them lose it. A new voice suddenly spoke up in my mind. It was my own voice. It was a mother's voice. I tapped the button, Cancel Recurring Transfer. A small pop-up appeared asking, Are you sure you want to cancel this series of transfers? I pictured the chilled martini glass from her story. I tapped yes. Transfer canceled. I didn't stop there. I went to the sub-account emergency fund I had set up just for them. The one Clarice had direct access to in case of supposed sudden medical issues. There was $4,500 sitting in it. I transferred every penny back to my main checking account. I went to the credit card settings for the American Express. I had added Monroe to as an authorized user so the poor thing could pay for gas and groceries. I removed her. The card was deactivated. I logged into the auto insurance portal for the policy I paid monthly. Cancel policy. I sat there in the hospital bed, tapping the screen over and over again, methodically and systematically dismantling the entire financial architecture of my parents' lives. With every click, I expected to feel burning guilt. I expected to feel the crushing weight of being a bad daughter, but I didn't. I felt lighter. I felt completely cleansed. A strange, cold calm washed over me. It felt exactly like walking out of a prison cell and realizing the door had been unlocked the entire time. I put the phone down. My hands were still shaking, but they were steady enough. I leaned back against the pillows and stared at the ceiling. I was in physical agony. I was bone-tired. I was terrified for my little girl's life. But for the first time in 9 years, I was finally free. An hour later, the door flew open. It was Callahan. He looked like he had walked through the center of a hurricane. His clothes were wrinkled. Wet hair was plastered to his forehead, and his eyes held a frantic exhaustion and pure fear. "Sloan!" He rushed to the bed. He completely ignored all the tubes and wires. He buried his face in my neck and sobbed loudly. He was shaking all over, a deep, guttural release of 12 hours of absolute terror. I wrapped my one good arm around him, stroking his wet hair. "I'm here," I whispered. "I'm here, Cal. I'm okay." He pulled back and cupped my face in his hands. He looked at my bruises. He looked at the bandage on my stomach. "I am so sorry." He choked out through tears. "I am so sorry I wasn't with you." I drove as fast as I could. The roads were iced over. I couldn't make it in time. "It's okay," I said. "You're here now." He took a deep breath, trying to compose himself, but his eyes burned with a dark, boiling fury I had never seen before. "Did they come?" he asked. He knew the answer. He just needed me to confirm it. I didn't answer. Callahan stood up and started pacing the small room. He ran a hand through his hair. "I called them." "Sloan," he said, his voice trembling. "I called from the car. I told them you were in surgery. I told them Auden was coming. I begged them to go to the NICU." He stopped and looked at me, his face twisted in pain. "Your mother asked if it was really that bad. She said they were at dinner and didn't want to be rude to their friends." I nodded. "I saw her post, Cal. I saw the martinis." Callahan kicked the trash can in the corner. It made a loud, hollow clang that echoed through the room. "They didn't even hesitate," he said, his voice breaking. "They chose appetizers over Auden. They chose a party over you when you were dying." He sat heavily on the edge of the bed and put his face in his hands. "I'm done, Sloan," he whispered. "I am done with them. I don't care if they end up on the street. I will never let them near the baby. Never." I reached out and grabbed his hand. "I already did it," I said quietly. He looked up. "I canceled the transfers. All of them. The mortgage, the insurance, the cards. It's over. Wiped clean." Callahan looked at me. He saw the pure steel in my eyes. He saw that the woman who had spent a decade terrified of saying no to them was gone forever, replaced by someone who had survived a horrific crash, an emergency C-section, and the worst possible betrayal all in one night. "Good," he said firmly. "Good." Then there was a soft knock on the doorframe. It was the same nurse. She looked hesitant to interrupt, but she held something in her hand. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance?" she asked. "Yes," Callahan said, hurriedly wiping his eyes. "I know you requested no visitors," the nurse said, "but there was an older gentleman here earlier. He showed up about 20 minutes after your husband first called us." My heart beat faster. "Who was it?" I asked. "He didn't want to disturb you while you were still waking up from anesthesia," the nurse explained. "He said he didn't want to crowd the room, but he went down to the NICU viewing window. He stood there for a solid 2 hours, just watching the baby. He wouldn't even sit down. He just stood guard." She walked closer and placed a small, white card on the nightstand. "He told me to give this to you as soon as you woke up," she added. "He said to tell you the perimeter is secure." I picked up the card. It was a simple, thick business card, printed on high-quality paper. No unnecessary frills. Vance Construction. I turned it over. On the back, written in handwriting that was shaky but full of strength, were 3 words. "I am here." I felt my throat tighten with emotion. Callahan looked at the card and let out a long, shaky breath. "I called him," Callahan admitted. "When your parents refused to come, I had no idea who else to call. I called your grandfather, and he came. He told me on the phone he was only 20 minutes away, so he must have been here hours before me. I ran my thumb over the letters of his name. My parents lived 15 minutes away and couldn't leave a party. My grandfather lived 40 minutes away, was 80 years old, and fought through a horrific blizzard just to stand guard outside a hospital window so my daughter wouldn't be alone. He's already moving, I whispered. What? Callahan asked. Grandpa, I said, looking at the door. He didn't just come here to visit. He's planning something. He said to tell us he was securing the perimeter. I looked at Callahan. He knows, I added. He knows what they did. Callahan nodded grimly. I think everyone is about to know. I pressed the business card to my chest, right where my heart was beating a new, incredibly steady rhythm. Let him in, I told the nurse. If he comes back, let him in. He's family. The nurse nodded and left. I looked out the window. The snowstorm outside was slowly breaking. The sun was starting to rise, gray and cold, but bringing light at last. I was in physical pain, I was drained, I was exhausted. But for the first time in my life, I knew exactly who was actually playing on my team, and God help anyone who tried to stand in our way now. The door opened at 10:00 a.m., and the air in the room instantly changed. It didn't get warmer, it got heavy. Grandfather Harlan walked in first. I hadn't seen him in person for 3 years. He looked older, his skin resembled crumpled parchment, and he moved with a slight limp in his right hip that betrayed decades of climbing scaffolding. But he didn't look frail. He looked like a man who had brought the entire storm inside with him. He was wearing his Sunday suit in charcoal wool, smelling of cedar and rain. Under his arm, he carried a thick, bound folder of documents. He walked straight to my bed. He didn't look at the machines. He didn't look at the IV. He looked straight into my eyes. He took my hand, the one without the IV, and squeezed it hard. His hand was rough, calloused, and impossibly warm. I am here, Sloan, he said. His voice was a low rumble, stable as a foundation. Grandpa, I choked out. He nodded, cutting off my apologies before they could even leave my lips. We will talk about why you didn't call me later. Right now, we have work to do. He turned and pulled the ugly blue vinyl chair closer to the bed. He sat down with a grunt and placed the folder on his lap. He didn't open it yet. He just rested his heavy hand on top of it, as if holding down a wild animal. Then the door opened again. Victor walked in. My father looked like a ghost. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes red, and he nervously wrung a baseball cap in his hands. He looked utterly exhausted. He looked like a man who had been dragged behind a horse for a few miles. Sloan, he whispered, stopping a few feet from the door. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I looked at him. I tried to find the pity I usually felt for him, the sense that he was just a victim of Clarice's personality, a leaf blown around by her wind, but I couldn't find it. I only saw the man who was in the car when the decision was made to order charcuterie instead of rushing to his dying daughter and grandchild. Where is she? I asked. Vance flinched. She's parking the car. She had to fix her makeup. She was crying so much, Sloan. She was hysterical. I looked at Callahan. He was standing in the corner with his arms crossed. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. He said nothing. He didn't have to. The door opened a third time, and this time it stayed open. Clarice burst in. She wasn't hysterical. She was a choreographed performance. She wore a tightly belted trench coat and oversized sunglasses, which she removed dramatically as she crossed the threshold. Her makeup was fresh. Almost too fresh. Her eyeliner was razor sharp, her lipstick a perfect muted rose. She smelled of expensive perfume and breath mints. Sloan! She wailed, throwing herself toward the bed. Oh, my baby. My poor baby! She reached out with perfectly manicured hands. Callahan took a step forward, physically blocking her path. Do not touch her, he said. His voice was low. Dangerous. Clarice stopped, looking affronted. She blinked, shifting her gaze from Callahan to me, and then her eyes landed on Grandfather Harlan sitting in the chair. She froze. The theatrical concern vanished from her face in a fraction of a second, replaced by a flash of genuine terror. It was the look of a child who suddenly realizes the school principal is sitting in the living room. Dad, she said, her voice jumping an octave. What are you doing here? I am visiting my granddaughter, Harlan replied. He didn't stand up. He didn't smile. Since her parents were too busy to do so last night, Clarice flushed an ugly, deep shade of red. But she recovered quickly, slipping back into the role of the misunderstood martyr. "Oh, Dad, you don't understand," she said, clutching her chest. It was all a misunderstanding. We didn't know how serious it was. Callahan was screaming into the phone and we couldn't understand him over the noise, and we thought it was just a fender bender. You know how Sloane panics. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for me to validate her story. Pleading for me to play the same game I had played for 34 years. "Tell him, Sloane," she urged mutely. "Tell him you panic sometimes." I stared at her. I looked at the woman who brought me into the world. I almost died. "Mom," I said flatly. I wasn't panicking. I was bleeding out on an operating table. Clarice's mouth opened and closed. "Well, we are here now," she finally said, as if that erased the past. "We are here, and we are ready to help. I can move in with you for a few weeks, Sloane. I'll take care of the house while you recover. I know you'll need help with the baby." She was already planning an invasion. She was already scheming how to wedge herself back into the center of things. "No," Callahan cut in. "Excuse me?" Clarice snapped, turning to him. "I am her mother, and I am her husband," Callahan fired back. "And you will never set foot in our house." Clarice turned to Victor. "Victor, say something. Tell them they are being ridiculous. We are family." Vance stared at his shoes. "I think we should listen to them, Clarice," Clarice scoffed. "This is unbelievable. We rushed down here, sick with worry, and this is the thanks we get." Grandfather Harlan cleared his throat. It was a loud, booming sound that silenced the entire room. "Sit down, Clarice. There are no more chairs," she replied, looking around. I said, "Sit down." She perched on the edge of the radiator cover under the window, looking like a sulky teenager. Harlan lifted his hand from the folder and opened it. The rustle of papers sliding against each other was the only sound in the room. "I had some time for reading recently," Harlan said. He pulled out a stack of documents. They were stapled together. "I stopped by the bank this morning. I have a friend there. I also stopped by your house, Clarice. Vance let me in." Clarice shot Victor a venomous glare. Victor shrank into himself. "I found some interesting discrepancies," Harlan continued. He held up a sheet of paper. "Sloane," he said, looking at me, "how much money do you send your parents every month?" Clarice immediately interjected. "Dad, that is private. That is between us and $3,000, I said loudly, plus emergency expenses. Harlan nodded, setting the paper down. "That matches the deposits I see here. On their joint account." He picked up another paper. This time, it was a screenshot. It was blurry, but I recognized it. It was a Facebook post from my Aunt Maria. "So proud of my sister Clarice," Harlan read aloud. "Always making ends meet with such dignity. Even when her daughter never lifts a finger to help them out. Praying for their mortgage." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What does that mean?" I whispered. Harlan looked at Clarice. "Do you want to tell her, or should I?" Clarice looked away, pretending to inspect her fingernails closely. "Maria always has to act superior," she muttered. "I just had to explain to her why money was tight. I couldn't tell her we were taking money from our own child. It's humiliating, Dad. It makes us look like failures. So instead, you chose to make me look like a monster?" I asked, my voice rising. "You told the entire family that I'm cold? That I don't help you?" "You have a great job," Clarice snapped. "You can survive a little hit to your reputation. You don't even live in our neighborhood anymore. Who cares what Maria thinks?" I cared. With a sickening knot in my stomach, I realized that every cold stare, every snide comment I had endured at family reunions over the last decade, had been artificially engineered by my own mother. I paid over $300,000 to be the black sheep of the family. Harlan flipped a page. "And now for the best part," he said. He looked at Victor Vance. "Look at me." Vance looked up. His eyes were glassy. "Did you know?" Harlan asked. "Did you know how much money she was sending you?" Vance swallowed hard. "I knew she was helping," he he stammered. Clarice handles the bills. I just work at the hardware store. I hand her my paycheck. Harlan slammed his flat hand on the table. The sharp sound made everyone jump. Do not lie to my face, boy, Harlan roared. His voice filled the room. I saw your tax returns. You signed them. You knew exactly how much money was coming in. You watched your daughter bleed out every dollar for 9 years, and you said nothing. Why? Vance started to cry. He let out a weak, pathetic sob. Because it was easier, he wailed. Because if I asked questions, Clarice would yell. She would throw it in my face that I didn't earn enough. She made my life hell, so I just let it happen. I'm sorry, Sloan. I am so sorry. He was sorry, but he traded my financial future for his peace and quiet after work. He sold me out to buy silence in his own house. Clarice stood up, nervously smoothing her trench coat. All right, fine, she said, her voice high and squeaky. So we took some help from her. We aren't perfect, but we are family. We can fix this. Sloan, honey, we can work out a repayment plan. I'll talk to Maria. I'll fix the rumors. Let's just not blow this out of proportion. We are here for the baby. That's what matters. I looked at her. I saw the genuine desperation in her eyes. But it wasn't desperation for me. It was desperation over losing her status quo. She was desperately trying to glue her smiling mask back on. You rejected my child, I said. My words dropped like stones, cold and hard. What? Clarice asked. Last night, I replied. Callahan called you. You were 15 minutes away. You knew I was in surgery. You knew Auden was lying there completely alone, and you refused to come. You preferred to eat calamari. I raised my voice, the pain in my incision tearing through me, but I saw you laughing with a martini glass at the cerulean room at the exact same moment the doctors were slicing me open. Dead silence filled the room. Clarice went pale. She had no idea I had seen the post. That was your choice, I said, my voice trembling with pure fury. You made a decision. You chose the party. You chose your perfect image. You chose yourself. You have always only chosen yourself. Clarice looked frantically around the room, searching for an ally. She found none. Callahan looked like he wanted to throw her out the window. Vance was crying into his hands. And Harlan watched her with the cold, detached interest of a judge who had already written the sentence. He closed the folder and tapped the cover with his index finger. There is only one thing I still don't understand, Harlan said quietly. He looked at Clarice. He used a tone I had never heard him use before. It wasn't a father talking to a daughter. It was an auditor talking to an embezzler. I did the math. Clarice Marie, he said. He used her middle name. He never used her middle name. Clarice flinched like he had thrown a rock at her. Sloan sent you nearly $315,000 over these 9 years, Harlan said. To pay for a mortgage. He leaned forward slightly. A mortgage that doesn't exist. I paid that house off completely 15 years ago. You've been pocketing that girl's money under the guise of foreclosure. He took a step toward her. I looked at your credit card debt. It's high, but even that doesn't explain the disappearance of a mountain of cash. I looked at the house renovations. You didn't fix the roof. You didn't replace the plumbing. Clarice began to slowly back toward the door. Dad, I don't know what you're talking about. The cost of living is so... Stop. Harlan cut her off. Then he stood up. He rose from the chair with the unstoppable force of a tectonic plate shifting. He was 80 years old. But in that moment, he towered over her. You have no savings, he gritted out. You have no equity. You have absolutely zero assets. And you took over 300 grand from this girl. He took a step toward her. So I am going to ask you one question, and you will answer it before you leave this room. Clarice hit the door with her back. She was trembling. It was real, animalistic fear. Where did the rest of it go, Clarice? The question hung in the hospital air like thick smoke. Clarice's eyes darted nervously around the room. She looked at Vance, who had suddenly stopped crying and was staring at her with a dawning horror. Clarice, Vance whispered. What does he mean? Clarice didn't answer. She looked at me one last time. There was not an ounce of love in her eyes. It was pure calculation. She was trying to figure out if she could still talk her way out of this. But looking at Harlan's hard face, she finally realized the terrifying truth. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't asking the question because he didn't know the answer. He was asking to confirm what he had already found. "I have to go," Clarice stammered. "I need air. I feel faint." She turned and yanked on the handle, practically tumbling into the hallway just to escape. The door clicked shut behind her. The silence that followed was suffocating. Vance looked at Harlan. "Dad," he asked, his voice shaking. "What did you find?" Harlan didn't answer him. He looked at me. He looked at the tears streaming down my face. He sat back down in the chair and placed his heavy hand over mine once more. "Rest, Sloane," he said gently. "The storm has passed. We will deal with the wreckage tomorrow." But looking at my grandfather's jaw setting like a block of granite, I knew perfectly well the storm hadn't passed at all. The hurricane had just moved through. Now came the flood. It had been 3 weeks since I left the hospital, and my house had become a fortress filled with quiet, gentle sounds. The silence in our living room was no longer the empty, terrifying silence of the NICU. Nor was it the tense, heavy silence of a phone waiting to ring with another demand for money. It was the peaceful, rhythmic silence of a healing home. It was the sound of Auden breathing in her bassinet. It was the hum of the dishwasher in the kitchen. It was the rustle of a page turning as Callahan read a book while I nursed our daughter on the couch. My surgical incision was healing well. The angry red line across my lower abdomen had faded to a dull pink and only itched when it was humid outside. But the scar in my mind, the severed tie with the people who raised me, was still fresh, gaping, and unstitched. I hadn't spoken to them since that scene in the hospital room. Grandfather Harlan handled the logistics of their exit that day. I don't know exactly what he told Clarice to make her leave the hallway, but I imagined he used the same tone he used to shut down unsafe construction sites. They vanished, retreating to the house I was no longer paying for, to sit on the furniture I bought, and likely panic. But for Clarice, silence wasn't a state of being. It was a tactical error she felt compelled to correct. The voicemails started appearing 3 days after we brought Auden home. At first, they were tearful. "Sloane, honey, I can't stop crying. I'm looking at your baby pictures and just sobbing. How did we get here?" Then they became defensive. "Your father is a mess. He can't sleep. You know how he is. We are just worried about you. We just want to know the baby is okay." And then, predictably, they became pure theater. I knitted a blanket. "It's pink. I know you probably don't want it, but I made it anyway. A grandmother has to do something." I listened to them on speakerphone while slowly folding tiny onesies. Callahan wanted to block her number, but I stopped him. I needed to hear the progression. I needed to hear her desperation grow. It was my personal weather forecast. It told me exactly which way the wind was blowing in her mind. And the wind was clearly blowing toward a settlement. She wanted a return to the status quo. She wanted her private ATM rebooted. I decided to give her one chance. It wasn't a chance at redemption. With the clarity of a woman who had nearly died, I knew perfectly well redemption wasn't on the table. It was a chance for ultimate closure. I needed to look her in the eye one last time without the haze of painkillers and see if there was any humanity left behind the constant calculations. I texted her on a Tuesday. "You can come see Auden on Saturday at 2:00 p.m. You have 1 hour. Just you and Dad. No Monroe. No drama. If you mention money, you leave immediately." She replied in seconds. "We will be there. Thank you, honey. You won't regret this." Saturday arrived with a bruised, leaden sky. Callahan was a bundle of nerves. He wiped down the kitchen counters 3 times and checked the locks on the doors. He looked less like a man preparing for a family visit and more like one preparing for a siege. "She's going to pull something," Callahan said, wringing out a dish towel with excessive force. "You know she is going to pull something." "I know," I replied, adjusting Auden's collar. She was wearing a simple white onesie. I didn't dress her up. This wasn't a beauty pageant. That's why Grandpa is coming. Grandfather Harlan arrived at 1:30 p.m. He was half an hour early because he respected punctuality and the anxiety of new parents. He walked in, hung his coat on the rack, and washed his hands at the kitchen sink for 2 solid minutes before even looking at the baby. When he finally approached the bassinet, he looked as though he were approaching holy relics. He reached in with his large, scarred finger and let Auden wrap her tiny hand around it. "She has a strong grip," he said softly. A true Vance. He took a seat in the armchair in the corner of the living room. He didn't sit in the center of the room. He positioned himself like a sentinel. He had his folder with him again, though this time, he left it inside a leather satchel by his feet. "I want you to know," Harlan said, looking at me, "that I am not here to referee a fight. I am here to witness the truth. Whatever happens today, Sloane, you are the mother. You set the rules." I nodded. "Thank you, Grandpa." 2:00 p.m. struck. The doorbell didn't ring. 2:10. Callahan paced the hallway nervously. "Typical," he muttered. "She can't even give you this. She has to control the time. If she's late, she makes you wait for her. It's a power play." 2:20. Finally, at 2:25, the doorbell chimed. I took a deep breath. I picked Auden up, holding her against my chest like a shield. "Open it," I told Callahan. Callahan opened the door. Clarice stood there. She was holding a large gift box tied with a ribbon. She wore a pastel floral dress that looked more appropriate for an Easter brunch than a grim reconciliation. Behind her stood Vance, looking miserable and gray. And behind Vance, staring at her phone, was Monroe. My stomach knotted painfully. I was clear. No Monroe. Clarice breezed past Callahan before he could even open his mouth. "We're here," she announced, bringing in a gust of cold air and expensive perfume. The traffic on the interstate was a nightmare. You know how it is. She froze when she saw me. She put a hand over her mouth, her eyes instantly welling with practiced tears. "Oh, Sloane, look at you. You look tired, but beautiful. And this little one." She reached her hands out toward us. I took a step back. "I said no, Monroe," I stated calmly. Clarice stalled. She made a vague gesture behind her. "Oh, honey, I couldn't leave her home alone. She was so depressed. She just wanted to see her niece. She promised to be quiet. Don't be so cruel, Sloane. This is a celebration." Monroe looked up from her phone. She snapped a bubble of gum loudly. "Hey, Sloane," she said. "Cool place. Smaller than I thought." I looked at Callahan. He looked ready to physically throw them out. I gave my head a slight shake. "Come in," I said. "But you're late. You have 35 minutes. Clarice's smile faltered for a second, but she quickly recovered. She walked into the living room. Then she saw Grandfather Harlan. He sat motionless as a statue in the corner, watching her intently. "Oh," Clarice said, her voice jumping. "Dad, I didn't know you were invited." "I am always invited," Harlan replied. Clarice swallowed hard, gripping the gift box tighter. "Well," she sat on the couch, patting the cushion next to her for Vance to sit. Monroe wandered over by the window, looking bored. Only occasionally glancing at Auden with the same interest one might show a new lamp. Clarice spent the first 10 minutes playing the perfect grandmother. She cooed at Auden from a safe distance. She told stories about when I was a baby, stories that, I noticed, revolved entirely around her. "I was in labor for 20 hours. I ruined my figure for you." But her eyes kept darting. Whenever she thought I wasn't looking, her gaze drifted toward Grandfather Harlan. She tracked him. She watched his hands, his face, the satchel by his feet. She looked like a gambler trying to read the dealer's intent. Callahan noticed it too. He stood by the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed and his eyes narrowed. He watched Clarice nervously shift her weight, repeatedly trying to engage Harlan in small talk, which he completely ignored. "So, Dad," Clarice started, her voice unnaturally high and strained. "Have you been busy lately? Any new projects?" "I've been very busy," Harlan replied. "I've been cleaning house." Clarice flinched. She laughed nervously. "That's good. Spring cleaning is good for the soul." She turned back to me. "Sloane, honey. This is for the baby." She pushed the box toward me. I didn't open it. "I just set it on the coffee table." "Thank you," I said. "Aren't you going to open it?" she asked. It's the blanket I knitted, and some other things. Just the essentials. I don't need essentials, Mom, I said. I have everything I need. Clarice's jaw tightened. She looked at Monroe, who was currently taking a selfie, catching the back of Auden's head in the frame. Monroe, honey, put the phone away, Clarice hissed. Monroe rolled her eyes. I'm just putting it on my story. People want to see the baby. No. I cut in sharply. No photos on social media. Monroe scoffed. Relax, Sloane. I didn't even tag you. God, you've gotten so uptight since you became a mom. Callahan stepped forward. Put the phone away, Monroe, or get out. With a dramatic sigh, Monroe dropped her phone into her purse. Fine, whatever. The tension in the room was thick as humid air, but it wasn't the warm, chaotic tension of a family gathering. It was the cold, sharp tension of a failing negotiation. I needed water. My throat was bone dry from holding back the urge to scream for years. I'm going to get a glass of water, I said. Cal, hold Auden. I handed the baby to him. He took her, holding her close to his chest and turning slightly away from Clarice. I walked into the kitchen. It was open to the living room, but the angle of the refrigerator hid me from the sightline of the people on the couch. I turned on the faucet, letting it run to mask the sound of my heavy breathing. I turned it off after a moment. Immediately, I heard whispering. It was low, urgent, coming from the hallway near the bathroom, where Clarice and Monroe had supposedly gone to powder their noses moments after I stepped away. You promised, Monroe whispered. Her voice was whiny, petulant. You said you were going to fix this today. Hush, Clarice hissed. Keep your voice down. He's right there. Mom, Monroe said. Just talk to him. You said you'd convince him to reverse it. I can't live off that stupid allowance. Mom, it's a joke. I have a car lease due in 2 weeks. I froze. My hand gripped the cold granite counter. Reverse it. They weren't talking about me. They were talking about Grandpa. I leaned in, listening harder. I know, Clarice whispered. Her voice was dangerous. It was a low, sinister growl I had never heard from her before. I know what's at stake, Monroe, but he's watching me like a hawk. I need an opening. Just cry, Monroe suggested. You're good at that. Tell him you're sorry. Tell him Sloane is being mean to us. Just get him to sign the paper. It's not that simple, Clarice snapped. He has that folder. He knows about the accounts. So lie, Monroe said. Say Sloane gave it to us as a gift. Say he misunderstood. I am not losing my inheritance over this. I am trying, Clarice said. But Callahan is guarding them like a pit bull. I heard the rustle of fabric. Clarice was pacing the small hallway. Just get them out of the room, Clarice said, her voice dropping into a chilling, icy resolve. Distract Sloane. Spill something. Start an argument. I don't care. You want me to make a scene? Monroe asked. I want you to get me 5 minutes alone with him, Clarice said. Just give me 5 minutes. Let me work him. He's an old man. He loves me. I can wrap him back around my finger. I just have to isolate him from her influence. I stood in the kitchen, completely forgetting the glass of water on the counter. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They weren't here for Auden. They weren't here for me. They weren't even here to extort more money from me. They were here because Grandfather Harlan had done something changed. A will, a trust, something financial, and they were terrified. They came here to ambush an 80-year-old man in my living room. They came to manipulate the only person who had actually defended me. Let me work him. It was disgusting. Predatory. My first instinct was to grab a frying pan and chase them out of my house. I wanted to scream. I wanted to protect my grandfather. But then I remembered the folder. I remembered Harlan's calm, weathered face. I remembered what he told me. I am not here to referee a fight. I am here to witness the truth. He knew. He knew exactly who he was dealing with. He didn't need my protection. He needed them to show their hand. He needed them to prove, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that they were exactly what he suspected. If I stopped them now, They would claim it was all a misunderstanding. They would gaslight us. They would say I was paranoid. But if I let them talk, if I let them walk right into their own trap, I took a deep breath. I smoothed down my shirt. I picked up the glass of water and walked back toward the living room, but I stopped at the threshold right next to Callahan. He looked at me, saw the expression on my face. It wasn't the look of a victim anymore. It was the look of a hunter. "What did they say?" Callahan whispered. I leaned close to his ear. "They want 5 minutes alone with Grandpa. They think they can manipulate him into changing the will. They think I'm the one turning him against them." Callahan's eyes went wide with rage. "I'm throwing them out right now." "No," I said, putting a hand on his arm. "Don't stop them, Cal." "Are you insane?" "Let them do it," I said quietly. "Let them think they have an opening. Let them try to corner him." "Why?" "Because Grandpa isn't the prey," I said, looking at the old man sitting calmly in the armchair. "He's the bait." Callahan followed my gaze to Harlan, then back to me. He understood. "Okay," he said, and shifted his stance. Clarice and Monroe returned to the room. Clarice looked refreshed, her mask firmly back in place. Monroe looked ready to play her part. "Everything okay?" Clarice asked brightly. I smiled. It was a very tight, razor-thin smile. "Everything is perfectly clear, Mom," I said. I sat down next to Grandpa. I saw Clarice's eyes gleam with triumph. She thought I was giving up. She thought she won the first round. She didn't know the bell had just rung, and she was stepping into the ring for the final knockout. The atmosphere in my living room shifted from a tense family gathering to something resembling a courtroom awaiting a verdict. Since my parents arrived, the doorbell had rung twice more, admitting my best friend Delaney and her husband, and then 2 of Callahan's colleagues from the engineering firm, Garrison and Hayes. I had invited them for 2 reasons. First, because they genuinely loved us and wanted to see Auden. Second, because I knew Clarice well enough to know she behaved entirely differently when she had an audience. She was a creature of optics. With witnesses present, she couldn't scream, she couldn't guilt trip, and she couldn't play the victim without risking her carefully crafted social mask. Or so I thought. The gathering was polite but stiff. Delaney was holding Auden, swaying gently by the kitchen island while Callahan poured drinks. Monroe was sulking on the couch, scrolling her phone and looking like a hostage in a facility that only served sparkling water. But Clarice was in constant motion. I watched her from the kitchen pass through. She was vibrating with nervous energy. She kept glancing at Grandfather Harlan, who hadn't moved from his armchair by the large bay window. He sat there like a monolith, his satchel at his feet, drinking black coffee and watching the room with eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Clarice was waiting for her opening. She was waiting for those 5 minutes she had demanded from Monroe. She found it when Callahan went to the garage to get more ice, and I was busy answering Delaney's questions about feeding schedules. I saw Clarice make her move. It was fluid, practiced, and utterly predatory. She walked over to the bay window, effectively cutting off Harlan's exit between the glass and the high back of his armchair. She leaned in close to him, resting a hand on his forearm in that same gentle, pleading grip she used whenever she wanted to sell a lie. I took a step forward to intervene, to stop her from harassing him, but I froze. I remembered our tech setup. Callahan had been tinkering with our home audio system all morning. We had a high-end digital baby monitor with crystal-clear audio because Auden had been napping in her Moses basket earlier. Callahan had placed the transmitter on the side table under the window, exactly where Grandpa was sitting, and routed the receiver through the Bluetooth soundbar under the TV so we could hear her breathe over the dishwasher. He hadn't turned it off. The music in the living room was playing softly. Some bland jazz playlist Clarice liked. But the feed from the baby monitor was still live. Through the low jazz, I watched Clarice lean in. She was close to the microphone. Very close. "Dad, please," she said. Her voice didn't stay in the corner. It projected from the soundbar, cutting through the jazz. It sounded slightly metallic, but it was perfectly audible. Callahan, who had just walked back in with the ice bucket, froze. He looked at me. I looked at him. I gave him a signal with my eyes. Do not move. Most people in the room hadn't noticed yet. They thought it was just background noise. Clarice, unaware that she was speaking directly into a microphone, dropped her voice into the conspiratorial whisper she used for secrets. But over a baby monitor, a whisper doesn't sound like a whisper. It sounds like a hiss. "You have to listen to me, Dad," Clarice said. Her voice echoed slightly, causing Delaney to look up from the baby in confusion. Sloane isn't seeing the big picture. She never has. The room started to quiet down. Garrison and Hayes stopped talking about football. They looked at the speakers. Grandfather Harlan didn't say a word. He just looked at her. Clarice took his silence for submission. She pressed harder. "Listen, I know you're angry about the accounts," she said. "I know how it looks. But you have to be fair. Sloane is fine. She has always been fine. She has Callahan. She has her big corporate job. She's ruthless, Dad. She pinches every penny. She doesn't need that help." I felt a cold chill and a hot flush hit my neck simultaneously. Ruthless. I was ruthless because I paid her bills, Clarice continued, her voice gaining momentum and confidence. But Monroe is so fragile. She's an artist. She doesn't have a husband to pay for everything. She needs a safety net. If you change the trust in Sloane's favor, you are condemning Monroe to poverty. You are punishing the only one who actually needs you. I saw Delaney's jaw drop. She looked at me, pure horror on her face. Clarice wasn't done. Sloane has more than enough. She's greedy. She's held this money over our heads for years, making us beg for every dollar. Do you know how humiliating it is? Having to ask your own daughter for grocery money? She likes it. She likes controlling us. Dead silence gripped the room. The jazz music cut out. Callahan had disabled the music from his phone, leaving only the raw, crackling audio of the baby monitor. Clarice, still oblivious, took the quiet in the room as the privacy she asked for. She thought she was winning. "Just sign the amendment, Dad," she pleaded. "Put it back the way it was. 50-50. It's the only fair thing. Don't let Sloane steal Monroe's inheritance just because she's bitter about a car crash." A car crash. She called almost losing my life being bitter about a car crash. Grandfather Harlan finally spoke. His voice was deep, resonant, and because he was sitting right next to the transmitter, it boomed from the speakers like the voice of God himself. "Look behind you, Clarice." Clarice frowned. "What?" "Look behind you." Clarice turned around. She looked at the room. She saw Delaney clutching Auden, staring at her with pure disgust. She saw Garrison and Hayes looking at the floor, embarrassed to bear witness to such naked moral rot. She saw Callahan, looking like he was about to tear the house down with his bare hands. And she saw me. I stood halfway in the kitchen pass-through, holding my glass of water. I wasn't crying. I wasn't screaming. I was just watching her. Clarice looked confused. She looked at all the faces, not understanding why everyone was staring at her. And then she heard the feedback. A high-pitched whine emitted from the speaker as she shifted her position. Her eyes fell on the soundbar. She looked at the small white device sitting on the table next to Harlan's elbow. The blood drained from her face so fast it looked like she had been physically struck. She turned a sickly, ashen gray. I didn't," she stammered, desperately looking for somewhere to hide. Monroe, who had been scrolling her phone, finally realized what happened. She jumped off the couch. "You guys are sick!" Monroe shrieked, her voice shrill. "You're spying on us? That's illegal. You don't know the whole story. You're taking this out of context." Grandfather Harlan stood up. He picked up the baby monitor transmitter and turned it off. The silence that followed was heavy and ringing. "Oh, I think we know the whole story," Harlan said. He walked to the center of the living room. "I think we've known the story for 9 years." Clarice tried to pivot. She tried to summon the tears, to play the victim, to revert to the script she had performed her entire life. "It's a setup," she cried, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You set me up, Sloane. You invited us here to humiliate me in front of your friends. You're cruel. You are a cruel, ungrateful daughter." I took a step forward. "I didn't make you say those things, Mom," I said calmly. "I didn't force you to say I was greedy for paying your mortgage." I didn't force you to say I liked controlling you. I did it for the family, Clarice screamed. I did it to keep us afloat, and you judge me. You sit here in your nice house with your rich husband, and you judge me. Then something happened that froze her completely. Vance stepped forward. My father, who had been sitting on the couch like a piece of upholstery, stood up, walked to the center of the room, and looked at Clarice. He was shaking. His hands trembled at his sides, but his head was held high. Stop it, Clarice, Vance said. Clarice whipped her head toward him. Excuse me? Stop it, he repeated. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the room. They heard you. Everyone heard you. He looked at me, his eyes full of a lifetime of apologies. It's all true, Vance said. What is true? Callahan asked, stepping closer. She's been doing this for years, Vance continued, looking at the floor, then at Harlan. She tells everyone Sloan is cold. She tells Maria. She tells the cousins. She says Sloan is too busy for us. And then she spends the money Sloan sends us on. Things. Things? Harlan pressed. Vacations, Vance whispered. Remodels. A leased car for Monroe. She calls it image management. She says we have to look successful so people don't pity us. Victor, Clarice shrieked. Shut up right now. You have dementia. I don't have dementia, Vance yelled back. It was the first time in my life I had ever heard him yell at her. I'm just tired. I'm tired of lying to my own daughter. I'm tired of eating fancy appetizers while she's on an operating table. He looked at me, tears streaming down his face. I wanted to come, Sloan. That night, I wanted to come so badly. She hid the car keys. She said it would ruin the dinner. She said you'd be fine because you're made of Teflon. Teflon. I felt a crack in my chest. So that was how she saw me. Hard, synthetic, indestructible. I wasn't a person to her. I was just useful material. Clarice looked around the room. She had lost her audience. She had lost control of her narrative. She had lost Victor. Her mask didn't just crack. It shattered into a million pieces. She turned to me, her face twisting into something ugly, something feral. You think you're so special? She spat. You think because you make a little money you're better than us? You are nothing without me. I made you. I pushed you. And this is how you repay me? By embarrassing me in front of these strangers? She gestured wildly at Garrison and Hayes. These people don't care about you. They're laughing at you. They're laughing at your pathetic, broken family. Grandfather Harlan dropped his leather satchel onto the coffee table with a thud. It sounded like a gunshot. It stopped Clarice mid-sentence. Enough, Harlan roared. He looked at Clarice with eyes so cold they could freeze the sun. You want to talk about embarrassment, Clarice? You want to talk about humiliation? He reached into the satchel. This time, he didn't pull out a bank statement. He pulled out a legal document. It was thick, bound in a blue cover. Since you wanted to discuss inheritances publicly, Harlan said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, sepulchral calm. Since you wanted to lobby for Monroe in front of an audience, let's finish the conversation publicly. He held up the document. This is the Vance Family Trust. The one you wanted me to reverse. The one you were just whispering about. Clarice stared at the papers. Her breathing was shallow, rapid. I signed the amendment this morning, Harlan said. Before I drove over here, a flicker of wild hope sparked in Clarice's eyes. You did? I did, Harlan replied. He walked over to me. He handed me the document. Read the asset division clause, Sloan, he instructed. Out loud. I took the papers. My hands were shaking. I opened to the page he had bookmarked. Section 4, Asset Distribution. I cleared my throat. Upon my passing, the entirety of the Vance family estate, including all real property, liquid assets, and corporate holdings. I paused, looking at Clarice. She was holding her breath. Shall be transferred into an irrevocable trust for the sole benefit of my great-granddaughter, Auden Vance Callahan. Sloan Vance Callahan is named as the sole trustee and executor. Clarice let out a sound that was half gasp, half shriek. What? She screamed. That's everything. I kept reading. Victor Edward Vance shall receive a monthly stipend of $5,000, contingent upon proof of permanent, separate residence from Clarice Marie Vance. Vance looked up. A wave of absolute shock washed over his face. Clarice Marie Vance and Monroe Elise Vance are hereby entirely disinherited and excluded from any claim to the estate. I stopped reading. I looked at Harlan. He was staring at Clarice. You wanted a safety net? Harlan said softly. I gave it to the baby. Because that infant is the only person in this room who hasn't tried to rob me. But our house, Clarice stammered. Our house. The house is in my name, and it's been paid off for over a decade, Harlan stated firmly. It always has been. I let you live there rent-free. I let you pretend you owned it. He leaned in close to her. You have 30 days, Clarice. 30 days for what? She whispered. To vacate, Harlan said. I am putting it on the market. The proceeds go into Auden's trust. Clarice stared at him, horrified. She looked at me. She thought about that massive house she had filled with expensive things she could never afford. You can't do this, she hissed. We have squatters' rights. You have nothing, Harlan replied, his voice gaining power. You have exactly what you earned, absolute zero. He grabbed his coat from the rack. He looked at Victor. You have a choice, son, he said. You can stay with her and starve. Or you can pack a bag and come with me. I have a guest room. It's quiet, and nobody hides your car keys when your daughter is dying. Vance looked at Clarice. She was vibrating with rage. She looked like a demon. Then he looked at me. He looked at little Auden. I'll get my coat, Vance said quietly. Clarice started screaming. It was a wordless, animalistic howl of a woman losing total control. Get out, she screamed at Victor. Get out. You're all traitors. She turned to Monroe. Come on, Monroe, we're leaving. We don't need them. We'll sue them. We'll sue all of them. Monroe didn't move. She was staring at her phone. She looked up at Clarice. Mom, Monroe said, her voice completely flat. You said the estate was worth $8 million. It is, Clarice cried. And it belongs to us. Not anymore, Monroe replied. She stood up from the couch and grabbed her designer bag. I'm going to Patrick's. You're leaving with me? Clarice screamed. No, Monroe said. I'm not ending up homeless with you. Good luck. Mom. Monroe walked out the front door. She didn't look at me. She didn't say goodbye. She simply followed the money. And the money had just left the building. Clarice stood alone in the center of my living room. Everyone was watching her. Friends, colleagues, the family she had destroyed. She looked at me one last time. She tried to summon the anger, the entitlement, the power she had held over me for so long. But it was gone. The wires were cut. The puppet strings were severed. You'll regret this, she hissed, but it sounded hollow. You'll need me someday. I looked at her, and for the first time, I saw her clearly. She wasn't a monster. She was just a small, sad, empty woman trying to fill her soul with things she couldn't afford. I won't, I said. Because Auden will not be raised inside your illusion. I turned my back to her. I walked over to Delaney and took my daughter into my arms. I buried my face in Auden's soft, warm neck. She smelled like milk, baby soap, and pure innocence. I heard the front door open. I heard the click of heels on the hardwood. I heard the door slam shut. She was gone. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was the silence of a battlefield after the guns finally stopped firing. Callahan let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for days. He walked over and wrapped his arms around me and Auden. We stood there, the three of us, shaking, crying, and finally, freely breathing. Grandfather Harlan sat back down in the armchair and closed his satchel. He looked tired. He looked every minute of his 80 years. I walked over to him, holding Auden. I sat on the ottoman at his feet. Grandpa, I said, thank you. He looked at me, his eyes wet. I should have done this years ago, he said gruffly. I knew she was bad with money. I didn't know she was eating her own young. You saved us, I said. He reached out and gently touched Auden's cheek. You saved yourself, Sloan. You canceled the transfers. All I did was bring the paperwork. He looked at the door Clarice had walked through. Love is not a transaction, Sloan. That's the lesson here. People who love you do not hand you an invoice for it. I nodded, the tears flowing freely now. So what do we do now? I asked. The house is gone. My parents are gone. It's so quiet. Harlan smiled. It was a small, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Now, he said. Now you build a life where people show up when you need them. He looked at Callahan, at Delaney, at Garrison and Hayes. He looked out the window at Victor, waiting by the truck. You fill this house with them. You fill it with truth. And you raise this little girl to know her tab was paid the second she was born. She owes nobody anything. I looked down at Auden. She was fast asleep, having slept through the screaming, the revelations, and the destruction of an entire family dynasty. She was safe. I kissed her forehead. We will, I promised. And as the sun finally broke through the gray clouds outside, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air of my quiet, honest home, I knew it was true. The knot was cut. The debt was canceled. And for the first time in my life, the ledger was perfectly balanced.